In this episode, I talked to Professor Gloria Mark, Chancellor's professor in the Department of Informatics at the University of California, Irvine, and one of the most renowned psychologists in the field of HCI, human-computer interaction. Gloria is a book author, science communicator, a sought-after speaker in the tech industry, and a blogger. Make sure to check out her blog on Substack, the link is in the show notes. Gloria has received a US National Science Foundation Career Award, multiple Google Research Awards, and has been inducted into the Chi Academy, a group of the most impactful researchers in the field of human-computer interaction. After obtaining a master's degree in Biostatistics from the University of Michigan and a PhD from Columbia University in psychology, she became a lab director in the field of team communication software in 1990. In 1995, she joined the GMD, a German research institute that is now part of Fraunhofer. Since 2000, Gloria has been a professor at the University of California in Irvine. On a Fulbright grant in 2005 and 6, she conducted research at the Humboldt University of Berlin. She also worked with IBM in Haifa, the University of Haifa, the National University of Singapore, with the MIT Media Lab in Massachusetts, and with Microsoft Research in Redmond, Washington. Her best-selling book, Attention Span, synthesizes scientific insights from her decades-long research on focus, distraction, technostress, and productivity. And in this episode, we talk about some of these insights. In our interview, we find out about the average attention span in the early 2000s.
We actually tracked every single activity that people did. At that time, we found their attention on any screen was 2.5 minutes on average before they switched screens.
How this attention span has dropped in the recent years.
From the period of 2016 through 2020, we find the average to be about 47 seconds on any screen.
How Gloria and her team investigated the physiological and psychological effects of short attention span.
We've had people wear heart rate monitors in the workplace.
The effects on productivity.
And the reason is found in decades of laboratory research in psychology. There's a switch cost.
And how to find focus again.
There are things that people can do based on psychological research to get more agency.
We also learn about some of Gloria's other research.
And basically, we wanted to see whether we could detect through the use of Twitter, through the language in Twitter, whether we also could see signs of this kind of desensitization.
And about her scientific approach more generally.
I like to be very objective as opposed to asking people to self-report.
We also talk about Gloria's personal approach to including digital devices in daily life.
I see devices as subservient to my life.
And the advantage of living in Southern California when it comes to stress reduction. Gloria is also a reviewer for the US Fulbright Commission, and in this episode she shares some perspectives on an ideal grant application.
It should be important. It should be something that can make a difference.
And now, I'm certain you'll enjoy and learn something in this episode with Professor Gloria Mark, interviewed by Mohammed Kari. Thank you so much for allocating your time and your precious attention to this podcast today. Thank you so much for joining today for the Fulbright Pulse podcast. You have an extraordinary faculty track record, Gloria, at University of California in Irvine. Started there as an assistant professor, became associate professor, full professor. You are by now a Chancellor's professor at the School of Information and Computer Science. And of course, you did many, many things before, some of which we can maybe talk about today. But first, let's really talk about this multitask and attention research, which you started around the time that you've joined UC Irvine. You have, of course, recently written a book about this called Attention Span, a fantastic book. We'll talk about a lot of the stuff that you also, of course, much more in detail describe in the book. As said, you started this research, from my understanding, around the time you joined UC Irvine in because in 2004, if I get that correct, you published this seminal landmark paper together with your PhD student Victor Gonzalez that has over 1,000 citations. I'm not sure if you've already seen this. It has 1,001 citations since a couple of days, probably, because
Yeah, I haven't.
citations go up. Yeah, so you
Yeah,
have actually
haven't
cracked
seen
that
it.
mark. You have actually cracked that mark. It is magical in HCI research. So, what was the motivation? What were the methods and the findings of your research at the time?
Yeah, so there were a lot of things happening at the same time. So, first of all, a little bit of background. I had lived in Germany and I had just moved from Germany back to the US. In fact, in Germany, I was working at the GMD, which is now merged with Fraunhofer. Gesellschaft für Mathematik und Datenbankverarbeitung is the German word. And I worked in a place that I thought was just a place of luxury because I didn't have to um, write grants, I didn't have to sit on committees, I didn't have to teach large classes, and so on. And I came to start work as an assistant professor, and I had to do all of these things. And it was hard. There were a lot of exciting projects. I wasn't just working on a single one. People kept saying, "Hey, we have this project. Do you want to collaborate?" I said, "Yes. How can I say no?" And before I knew it, I had just taken on too many things, and I found my attention just being um, stretched just too far. And I also found at the same time that it was very hard for me to stay focused on any one particular project or any one thing for that matter. I kept switching my attention from project to project to email to other things. And I wondered if it was just me. And I started talking with other people as well. And they said, yeah, they also have the same problem. And I wondered to what extent it had to do with our devices, right? Now, I had changed cultures, I had changed jobs. There, the whole technological culture in the US in the year 2000 was very different than Germany. The internet was uh, a little bit more penetrated into people's lives at that time. But still, I wondered, is this a widespread phenomenon or is it just me? So, being a scientist, I could study this, and that's uh, when I decided to set off and do this. And I had this student, Victor Gonzalez, at the time. He was very interested in the idea of knowledge management, and he needed to do a dissertation. He had lots of different ideas, and basically, we just settled on the idea that this is the right thing to be looking at, and so we collaborated on several papers, and at that time, let me just say that my approach to studying attention is I like to be very objective as opposed to asking people to self-report because
Mhm.
people are not very good at
Mhm.
reporting how long they've been paying
Right.
attention. People distort time.
Mhm.
And so it was so much better to measure attention through some objective means. And at the time, this was 2003, we used stopwatches and we would follow
Mhm.
people around in their workplaces pressing a stopwatch and noting down activities that people did. And then much later, there came computer logging software that we could
Mhm.
use. So yeah, so that was the motivation to study.
Right. And then you employed this kind of shadowing approach, as I understand, to really get objective measures on how often people would kind of, as I understand, switch applications basically, right? Switch windows or
Yeah,
switch
screens.
tasks. Or what did you find out
Yeah,
then in this research? And what do you describe
yeah,
in this fantastic paper as said, cited over 1,000 times?
yeah. So in that first study, we actually tracked every single activity that people did, whether you're talking on the phone, working on your computer, talking with people in person. We tracked every single activity. And at that time, we found people switched every 3 minutes on average, but their attention on any screen was 2.5 minutes on average before they switched screens, or switching windows to something else. So, yeah, the attention was pretty short, and it was surprising to me. I didn't think it was that short on average.
Right. So fast forward 20 years, you have updated these numbers together with your, at the time, PhD student Fatima Akbar. Where are we now in terms of attention?
Yeah, so from the period of 2016 through 2020, we find the average to be about 47 seconds on any screen on average. Now, this is work I did with colleagues at Microsoft Research. My student Fatima Akbar studied 50 information workers over 30 days for her dissertation. Andres Meyer at ETH in Zurich also did a study. We also did a study with college students, but all of these studies together, the overall average is 47 seconds on average, and by now we're using computer logging software, so we're no
Mhm.
longer walking around with stopwatches, but we're having the computer log window changes.
Right. So obviously that is a massive reduction from 3 minutes, which is kind of already surprisingly short, no, to like 40 seconds. And that if you say this is the average, it means that sometimes you just look at something for 10 seconds and you go away immediately and you just keep switching, right? So,
Yeah. So so first of all, it was 2.5 minutes
mhm.
for just time on screens back in
Right, right.
2004. But
Mhm,
if you look at the
mhm.
median is 40 seconds. And so what that means is that half of all of the observations were less than 40 seconds on any
Wow.
screen. So
Yeah.
yes, a lot of times people are spending 10 seconds, but sometimes people are also spending longer. But
Mhm.
we're not seeing too many long lengths because the average is still only 47 seconds, right?
Right,
So the average and median are pretty similar.
right. So is this problematic?
It is. And the reason it is because fast attention shifting is associated with stress. So we've had people wear heart rate monitors in the workplace so that we could see in real time what their stress levels are. The heart rate monitors are giving us a measure of what's called heart rate variability, which is the time between consecutive heartbeats. And when the variability is high, it actually means people are relaxed. And when the variability is really low, it means people are very stressed. And you can imagine that if you're really anxious, your heart is beating maybe a little faster and more regular. And so we find this very strong correlation that, at the times when people's attention is shifting a lot on screens, and of course we get the timestamps. So we can see exactly what those times are. We also get timestamps from the heart rate monitors. So we can sync them together. We can match them up and we can see exactly the correlation. And, attention switches fast, and we find that heart rate variability indicates stress.
You are more stressed, but are you also less productive?
Yes. And the reason people are less productive is found in decades of laboratory research in psychology, which shows that, if people are given multiple tasks to do and they're doing them at the same time, which actually means switching their attention between them. You compare that with doing one task, finish it work on another one, finish it. So working on them sequentially. And we find that it takes longer for people to finish those tasks when they're switching their attention as opposed to when they're doing them sequentially. Why? Because there's a switch cost. And every time you switch your attention to something new, you have to reorient your mind to this new task. From a psychological perspective, is that you have to retrieve a schema of that task, which means all the information you need for that task. It's stored in your memory. You have to bring it up, and you use that schema in order to help guide you about how to do this task. So there is a switch cost that adds to the time it takes to do
This switch
this.
cost, is this what you discovered in your 2008 paper, basically? So in 2008, you reported on the results, which you, I think, gathered during your Fulbright time
Yeah.
in Humboldt University of Berlin. So this was another landmark paper, again, cited many, many hundreds of times. So I'm wondering, what did you find out in this 2008 paper, if you remember? Maybe you do.
Yeah, I do, and actually that finding is contradictory to what I just said. In
Oh,
that
sorry.
we
I didn't want to
no,
crash your.
it makes a great story. It's always good when you find conflicting results because there's usually some deeper explanation behind it. But
Right.
in this case, we found that people worked faster. Now, this was a little bit different than multitasking. This was, we put people in a simulated condition where they were being interrupted with emails. So they were told to work on a single task, and we kept interrupting them. So it's a little bit different than working on, 3 or 4 different tasks and switching your attention, which is what the studies in psychological laboratories show. And when people are being interrupted, they actually worked faster on their
Mm.
tasks. And so uh, this is interesting. Like, why would you work faster? Um, Now, I would explain that as the fact that people have a finite amount of time in the day, and you have this task to finish. Let's say you have to write a report, it's due at the end of the day at 5 p.m., and you're constantly interrupted. So you speed up your work on that task because you anticipate that interruptions are coming. And so, people, it's like an economy in our
Hmm.
minds, right? So people are pretty good economists,
Hmm.
in the sense that they're allocating their attention uh, so that they do something very quickly, right? So that
Hmm.
they can meet the deadline. Now, it's it's not all roses, so to speak, because there's a downside, and the downside is that stress increases. So because people sped up their work and they're getting interruptions, they're dealing with interruptions, we find that stress increases. So this is not good, because if people are experiencing interruptions day in and day out, which is very common in the workplace, it can lead to chronic stress, and it can even lead to burnout if stress becomes pretty strong. So it's not a good thing.
Right. So you talked about these interruptions. What are the reasons that we see for this decrease from 2.5 minutes on screens to less than 50 seconds, 40 seconds, something in that magnitude?
Right. So we were in these studies, we're looking at people in the wild. I call this living laboratories. So we're using sensors, looking at what people are doing, mostly in knowledge work. We've done this with college students as well. Now, think about all the things that happened from 2003 until 2020. The smartphone was invented, right? This was what, 2007? Facebook became public 2003, and then Facebook really took off. All these other social media giants came about. Twitter, I think Twitter was around 2007, 2006. And then, of course, TikTok, which young people use quite a bit. And, we have Snapchat and Instagram. We also have, e-commerce just exploded. It just took off. So, it used to be that there were not so many offerings, online stores. Now every store has an online presence. News sites went online. So there were so many things that happened, right? And of course, algorithms affects our attention as well. So the whole digital landscape changed in over these 20 years.
Right. I mean, like you just said TikTok, and what I'm sometimes wondering is like, is TikTok the reason or the cause of this kind of reduction in attention? I feel like most people would somehow know that we are more distracted, maybe, and often looking like sometimes you just find yourself like scrolling through some kind of social media app where actually you should be doing your task and you're wondering how
Yeah.
did it end that I'm again doing this. So I think in your book you have this example of somebody opening their browser and just automatically typing Facebook. And
Yes.
there's two things shocking. Number one is anybody is using Facebook, and number two is I thought by now nobody is using Facebook anymore. And number two is that you kind of have this automatic kind of habit in yourself to open useless things that you don't really need. So,
Yeah.
can you say something about this reason or cause thing, or is
Yeah.
this like a vicious
Sure.
cycle?
Sure. So first of all, for Facebook, I will say that older people still use Facebook. Young people are no longer using Facebook, and that study was done. It was done a few years ago. And I agree. A lot of people are leaving Facebook now. Um, I would say it's both a cause and effect, and it's hard to disentangle these two. So yes, we are bored, we procrastinate, we have habits, and so we go to TikTok. On the other hand, TikTok has a very strong recommender engine, and it's very powerful, and it learns very quickly what people like. It forms a user model and can very quickly adapt content to what it believes the user wants. And it does that really, really quickly. It's very agile. And so that also serves to keep people glued to TikTok. And of course, there is this psychological learning theory called intermittent reinforcement, which means that it's not every video that's going to be very funny that people enjoy, but in a random basis, the videos will be enjoyable and they'll be funny enough that they provide rewards that keeps people stuck to that site. So it's
Right,
both a cause and effect.
right.
So there is this causal relationship, but also people of their own volition also go to TikTok for other reasons as well. I think it's probably a cycle.
Right. Yes. Um, so is this kind of so TikTok or these kind of things, these social media things, I kind of feel we often interrupt ourselves, right? We just open it despite not getting a notification. And then you have this other thing like email or somebody kind of knocking on your door, which is kind of this external interruption. Is there kind
Mhm.
of did this also change over the years that we are more easily distracted by kind of inherently distracted and we kind of distract ourselves and get away from tasks, or is so what is something to be
Yeah.
said about in this
So
area?
so it turns out that people are about as likely to self-interrupt as to be interrupted from notifications from something external. And it's there are a lot of reasons why people self-interrupt. They interrupt because they have an urge to look up information, or they have a memory of something they forgot to do. There's also this notion of unfinished tasks stay in our memories. So when we're interrupted from a task, it stays in our memory. It keeps going around and around and reminding us, go back and finish this task. Mm-hmm. This is known as the Zeigarnik effect, which Blume Zeigarnik in Berlin, the University of Berlin at the time, now it's Humboldt, but at the University of Berlin discovered this about 100 years ago. So lots of reasons why people self-interrupt. And I would also add that when people are bored, they become more susceptible to interruptions. And we found that also in our research. And so when you're bored, it's like your mind is just open to doing something that will stimulate it. And of course, the web is just open with all kinds of possibilities, including TikTok, right? Or doing web surfing. So lots of ways to get stimulation.
I see. So obviously the next question must be what to do about it. You talk also about it in your book, how to kind of deal with this and how to get better. And what I think is so great about your book is actually, from my mind, is that it is not like a classical how to live your life correctly book, which tells you how to change your personality and become the perfect person. And instead it gives you a lot of like scientific observations from all your research and a bit about which we already spoke, and then gives you a few things to do for self-regulation and planning your day. So what can you do as an individual in order to maybe increase your attention span again?
Yeah. So I think most people probably have ad blocks. That's like a basic thing, of course. But there are things that people can do based on psychological research to get more agency over their attention. So one of the things that people can do is to gain better awareness over the unconscious activities we do. And we do a lot of things that are just we're not aware of when we're using our devices. For example, we grab our phones, or having this urge to check TikTok or Twitter, now X. So how do we do that? How do we raise these unconscious thoughts to our conscious awareness? So during the pandemic, my university offered a course in mindfulness, which I found really valuable for helping with stress. But what I learned from mindfulness is that it teaches you to focus in the present. And it kind of, sometimes our thoughts are all over the place, and it keeps us really focused on the present. And I realized that people can do that when they're using their devices as well. How do you do that? You can do it by probing yourself and always learning to ask yourself reflective questions about what you're doing and why. And so when I have an urge to check the news, and there's a lot going on in the US right now, so I'm always trying to keep up with news. But I also ask myself, I recognize that urge. Do I need to read the news now? And chances are no. Chances are I can wait. When you make some unconscious thought conscious, then you can create a plan and you can be more intentional in your actions. If I see my phone, rather than just blindly, grabbing for it, I can ask myself, do I need to use my phone now? No, probably not. So this has helped me a lot. It's awkward at first, but it becomes a skill. It's a new habit that you develop. And all of a sudden, it's like I use it all the time, and it's really helped me stay on track. Another thing we can do is practice what's called forethought, which is imagining your future self. Now, people tend to think of future selves as, where do I want to be in 5 years? Where do I want to be when I graduate from college or when I get my PhD or, but we can think about our future selves at the end of the day. We can think of it very near term and think about where do I want to be? And very importantly, how do I want to feel? And chances are you want to feel relaxed. You want to feel fulfilled, rewarded for having finished your work. Create a visualization of yourself. For me, I think of myself sitting on the couch. And, I think of sitting there with my husband. I might be reading something, I might be watching a show, but I have this picture of myself relaxed and feeling really good. That's really strong and powerful and keeps me motivated to stay on track. It's a very, very powerful thing. Now, another thing we can do is keep goals in mind, and goals keep us directed, right? Now, everything we do is really goal directed. Going to TikTok involves a goal, and the goal is you want to have fun, or the goal is let me do something to avoid the work I'm doing, right? So I'll go to TikTok. But think about what your important goals are that you want to accomplish, and that's that keeps our attention directed, because attention is directed according to what our goals are. It's a very basic formula, right? Attention equals goal direction. And so we did a study with colleagues at Microsoft Research. And at the beginning of each day, we had a little chat bot that asked people, what do you want to accomplish today? And how do you want to feel today? And that brought people's goals to mind. And at least for a short while at the beginning of the day, they stayed on track. It was very strong. But then we discovered that goals slip, and it's very dynamic. And you can't just ask people to think of goals at the beginning of the day. So people need to be reminded throughout the day. You can write them down. You can design a little chatbot for yourself that keeps reminding you. But the important thing is that you need to be reminded continuously throughout the day, and that keeps you on track. And then another thing I'll mention is that when we get exhausted, then our attention tends to wander, right? We have limited cognitive resources. We have to think very carefully about how we allocate them. And, if you allocate them to something that's not directed to your work, you're using up those resources. When we're multitasking, shifting our attention, those resources are draining. When we get interrupted, it's draining. It's affecting us. So it's very important to take breaks, and really good breaks, not just 1 minute breaks where you're going to TikTok or going to email, but really a break where you pull away. Every day I go running. I spend a good chunk of time outside running, and boy, that resets me. And so it's so important for people
That is so easy to do in California where it's never raining. Try that in Germany. So
Yes, I know. I do. I am aware of that. Yes. That's true. But at least you can move around inside, and yes, it's a good,
I
very
see. There
good
is no
point.
solution. There is no solution.
There-
Yeah, we go.
No. So now people have rhythms of attention, right? There's this. It's a myth to think that people can focus for 10 hours straight. We can't. We have limited resources. We're humans. We don't have that capability. I will say you can do it if it's not involving a lot of mental effort. Like people can watch a YouTube video for 10 hours straight, because it's really not involving challenge to our minds. But if you're really trying to do hard work, reading difficult papers, writing, there is a limit to what you can do without taking a break. So it's really, really important. And it's important to understand your own personal rhythm of attention, when your peaks are, when your valleys are, and gear your work around to when those peaks and valleys are. Do your hardest work, what requires the most creativity at those peaks, at those peak times. And when you've got this valley where you're just in a slump, that's when you should take a break. And that's when you can do your, email, or your, you can play a little game if you want. But you want to replenish your attentional resources.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So thanks for sharing all of these great tricks. You have conducted research on these matters for more than 2 decades, so you certainly have this, what you call in your book, meta-awareness of, as you say, reflecting, do I really need this? Really even knowing how little time you spend being attentive. And once you realize probably how much cognitive kind of resources are drained by this, you are shocked about yourself, I guess. At least this was a bit like how it was for me, because I see myself reflected in this book a lot. And I was kind of thinking, okay, so I probably should maybe one technique that you, of course, share in the book is also this notion of batching notifications, especially email. I think iPhone in itself also has a notification batching mechanism by now. So you can even have all kind of notification being batched in the operating system of the mobile phone. You can also just yourself, this is how I do it by now. Sometimes email is often open if I know that this day will probably kind of require it, but other times I just like to close my email program before starting to write the next section of the dissertation or something. So I'd like to hear about you being so kind of aware of all these things. I'd like to hear how you personally do it. You already shared a couple of techniques you use, like running. Do you have an Apple Watch or any kind of like smartwatch?
I do.
And
Yes.
and how do you use it? Like, do you get distracted? This was really so I also got one just end of last year, and I was really wondering whether I should or not, because I thought and then I kind of thought you can still disable it. I never disabled all the notifications. I still get them there. So to be honest, I wasn't really following through with my plan. But how do you use your Apple Watch?
Yeah, so I turned off notifications. I don't get notifications on my watch. The main reason I use it is when I go running, I use it to keep time, and it measures my heart rate, and that's the
Right.
main reason I use it, or step counts. And for keeping time. And
Yeah, makes sense.
also, if my phone is on vibrate, then the Apple Watch vibrates, so it tells me that I have a call, even if I don't have my phone directly with
Right.
me.
I
But
get.
that's all that I use it for. I do have an Aura ring. These are
Okay. Also digital rings.
sleep
Sleep
trackers,
trackers. Okay.
and I rely on that a lot to help me understand what I need to do to optimize my sleep. So
Awesome. So you kind of live what you preach. So how many times a day do you check your email, and do you have zero inbox?
I do not have zero inbox. Absolutely not. I rely on search to find anything in my inbox. I am not good at creating folders. I discovered, at least for myself, that when I create smart folders, I forget about them. And so if I
Right.
create a smart folder for a person or for a topic, I just forget, and I never check these smart folders. So I can't do that. So I use search, and sometimes
That
it's
makes a
not
lot of sense.
very effective. Takes me sometimes a while to find things. I check email first thing in the day. I do that because of the Zeigarnik effect. The Zeigarnik effect is an unfinished task stays with you. If I don't check my email first thing, it's going to be nagging at me. Like, oh my goodness, what if someone has tried to contact me?
It's this whiteboard
Right?
metaphor, right? It's related to this whiteboard metaphor,
It's
right? That
it's
you have
like
this.
yeah. So you want that whiteboard to be clean,
Mm-hmm.
And so check email first thing in the morning. And depends on what I'm doing. I try to check email minimally. I try to set aside time, maybe late morning, to check it, and then again in the afternoon, and then usually maybe in the early evening I might check it, and then no more.
Mm-hmm.
But it depends. Some days I don't check it in the early evening because I'm through with the day,
Mm-hmm.
right? I'm I'm not going to, and I may not get uh, any email that comes early evening can always be taken care of the next day.
Right. Yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, you have also investigated many effects of social media, which is one big distractor, I guess. Apart from the stress factor, it seems that 2014 was a very incredible academic year for you. One Best Paper Award, two honorable mention awards at the CHI conference for human factors in computing, which is the leading conference. You just came back from Haifa at the time, where you were at IBM and the University of Haifa, and you would go on to proceed to the MIT Media Lab. So it seems that was an incredible time span in your life. And I wanted to ask about this paper that you published and which got this Best Paper Award called NARCO, which
Mhm.
where you also investigate the perception of violence on social media platforms. So, what was the research motivation in this paper, and what did you find out?
Yeah, so that paper was done with Moon Dechudheri and Andres uh, Monroy Hernandez. And it was very interesting. So we found that we looked at Twitter as a way to understand whether people had desensitization of the war. And let me explain what that means. You know, people in the US who grow up in areas of violence, after a while, they just become desensitized to the violence, right? Because they're seeing it every day. It almost becomes normal for them. They're not shocked anymore. And so we were able to look at the emotional intensity of the language. And we found that even though murders were increasing in different cities in Mexico due to the drug wars, we found that the way that language was used was was not commensurate with this increase in violence. In other words, people were not being more and more shocked, but they just kind of seem to be desensitized. So that's what was picked up by Twitter. And of course there's limitations because it only relates to the Twitter population, and it's not clear whether this can generalize to the entire population.
Right. So that is another kind of, it seems that social media does have a couple of things that we are not too fond of. So I'm wondering, do we want this trend to continue? For example, with all these advances that I actually personally myself are also working on augmented reality. I'm wondering what you think. Is it good that our society is kind of crunching more into this notion of ever more digitalization? You were just sharing that you were using two wearables on your body, so kind of and do we also want to put on the glasses, or is it necessary to kind of rethink how we deal with technology? I mean, like,
Oh,
if people spend like 2 hours on this is an average number for, like, I've read that in Germany people spend on average 100 minutes, and in the US 130 minutes a day on social media. That is GDP relevant, right? Whether you spend 2 hours a day on social media basically doing nothing. I'm exaggerating a bit here. It has value. I mean, like, it is important to look at Twitter maybe and see what people are saying sometimes, because you want to be part of that discussion, but a lot of stuff that we do is also useless. So I'm wondering, like, kind of where is this leading, especially with the new devices that we hope to see?
yeah, it's a really great conversation. I can start by talking about my perspective and my attitude. I see devices as subservient to my life. So they're not controlling my life, but they're helping my life. So I mentioned that, my watch I use to help me with giving me information about when I run, when I exercise, or when I take steps throughout the day. So I'm using that to get information about my health. I'm not, my attention is not drawn on this watch all day. And my Aura ring, of course, helps me improve my sleep. Now, my phone and my computer, I see as tools. And it's so important to have this perspective that they are tools that are subservient to our lives. They're supporting our lives. They're not our entire life. Our entire life and our identity and who we are is what happens in real life, right? And these are tools that are simply a way to help us achieve our goals in real life. And it helps us work, right? Simply, they are tools of our current age. In the same way that, 100 years ago, people had non-digital tools to help them, or they had typewriters, or they had the telegraph. They had other kinds of tools. And so it's so important for us to make that distinction between, our human lives are more important, and these tools just simply help us live our lives. They are not our lives. And it's so important to create a balance, and make sure that we don't lose touch with real life. For example, having conversations with people through, and ideally in person. Zoom is not bad when you can't be with a person face to face, but let's not lose touch with that, because if we're conversing through Twitter or Instagram, it's a very different kind of conversation. Or texting. Texting is very often used, and it confines our dialogue into very short snippets, very short chunks of content. And people are, I believe, especially young people, are learning the art of conversation. And so it's so important for us to be aware of that. So we need a balance, and our tools should not be taking over our lives. They can help us. They can give us access to medical services. We can do telemedicine. We can communicate with other people through work, communicate with friends. There's so many benefits that they have for us, but they should not be overtaking our lives.
Do you see it critically that we have this, or put differently, when I was doing my first internship in Apple, we had this kind of return to office policy for 3 days. In Meta, when I did the internship, we went back to, we only had 1 day of office. So is there any scientific grounding in how many times a week we should go to the office? Would you say that are you more productive if you go into the office and have, or is there any evidence kind of that you're more concentrated at home? Because this is actually how I feel. I feel that at home, if I really want to be concentrated, I can be so much more concentrated than in the open space, where sometimes there's chattering going on, and you often have kind of distractions, maybe from people talking to them. Whereas at home, I just shut the door, close Slack actually, and just work. Is there any kind of
So
scientific?
people have been studying this. I'm not aware of studies that are out yet. There could be, but I know that we did a study on how motivation is different between working in the office, working at home, and it turns out there are very different kinds of motivations. So when people are in a workplace with other people, they get social signals of other people, which facilitates them to work, right? People are always giving off signals showing they're working, or people are asking each other questions. And this creates motivation for people to stay on task. A lot of people at home report having difficulty in getting motivated, and that's what we found in our research. We did an interview and diary study where we asked people to keep track of their motivation. And when people were at home, they reported that they would do certain techniques to try to stay motivated, like taking an online course, or we know some people do what's called body doubling, where you have a Zoom window open with another person working. You don't talk, but just to have the visual presence of another person creates what's called social facilitation, which kind of helps get people motivated. So yeah, there are differences. There's differences in distractions. People at home are distracted by things in their personal work environment. People in the workplace are distracted by other people. So there's differences in kinds of distractions. Also, when people work at home, their workday is generally extended. So, we don't have these physical constraints of starting work at 9 a.m., ending at 5 or 6 p.m., but the workday tends to be stretched. And what also happens is that people have their own chronotypes, their own biological rhythms, and people tend to slip very easily into their own chronotypes when they work at home. So people who are early types might start working at 6 in the morning. People who are late types may not get started until 11 o'clock. And this is a problem for two reasons. First of all, if people are collaborating, there's less window of time for overlap to collaborate if people have different chronotypes. And we actually have a paper on this. But the other thing is that when people are switching schedules in a hybrid work situation, you go to work 2 days a week. If imagine you're a late type and you sleep until 10 in the morning, you do that on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, but then Tuesday and Thursday, you have to get up at 6 o'clock to get to work by, let's say, 8 or so. It's not good for the body to not have a regular sleep schedule.
Right, always kind of pull through the same schedule. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thanks so much for all these interesting insights into your work. I would love also to ask some biographical questions if time allows. So you graduated with a bachelor's degree from the Cleveland Institute of Arts,
Yes.
and then with a master's degree in biostatistics from the University of Michigan, and finally with a PhD in psychology from Columbia. So how did you start your studies in arts, and how did you end up becoming a world-renowned human-computer interaction scientist? So how was this journey?
Well, I I went into art because I loved it, and I never thought I would do anything else, and I didn't think of the reality of being an artist. But then when I graduated, I discovered, first of all, I didn't have the personality to work alone in a studio, and some people do, and I also I didn't have the motivation to work a day job doing some other kind of work and then doing my art in the evenings. It just, that wasn't for me. I remember one of the best artists in our school told me she was going to study to be a dental hygienist, which is, there's nothing wrong with doing that. It's a great profession. But I couldn't believe, like, she was such a gifted and brilliant artist, but she needed to do this to make a living. And I was always good at math. So I thought, okay, I'm just going to study something where I can get a 2-year degree and I'll get a good job, and that's it. But in the course of getting that degree, I discovered psychology. And that just hooked me to psychology. And I decided, okay, I'm not going to stop at this 2-year degree, but I'm going to continue on for a PhD. And that's what got me into psychology.
But do you still paint and draw today?
I don't, and the reason I don't is because it's art is so meaningful for me that I don't want to just have it be a hobby, like a weekend hobby.
I
If I'm
see.
going to do art, I'm going to do it full time because it's really a very important thing. But I will say that one of the I would say an interesting cycle of life, as you might call it, is that I was invited to give the commencement address at the Cleveland Institute of Art. So
Okay.
I this was last year, so I went back and I gave the commencement address about my journey as an artist and how I came into psychology.
Amazing. And suddenly all the students dropped out of Cleveland Institute of Arts and went to HCI. I hope not.
No,
Okay, so okay. No, awesome. This is yeah, this is a nice closure on I'm not sure if it's closure really, but it's a nice loop. Um,
it's a completion of a
yes.
circle. I the way
Yeah,
I
back
like to
here.
think of it.
Another such circles is one that you already mentioned, which is that you went to Berlin, where actually, as you said, a foundational psychological research was done in that area with the Zeigarnik effect that you just mentioned. So we already mentioned this time a Fulbright in 2005 and 6. This was at the Institute of Psychology at the Humboldt University of Berlin. You also had been in Germany for 4 years before, as you mentioned before, at the GMD. At this, you were giving it in the German name. I wouldn't be able to say the German name. I noted down the English one. German National Research Center for Information Technology
That's
in
right.
Bonn, which is now part of Fraunhofer. Why did you want to go to Germany in the first place and even speak great German? So, warum bist du nach Deutschland gegangen? Why did you go to Germany?
Because our two daughters at the time were growing up bilingual, and
Mm,
we wanted them to sort of understand more about Germany and also to get their language skills
mm,
back. And we just thought it would be a great experience for them to be able to go back to Germany, and of course that Germany, especially Berlin, has such a great tradition for psychology and also organizational psychology.
mhm.
So it just seemed like a great place to go. And we love Berlin. I have to say, one of my favorite cities in the whole world is Berlin. So it just was a good place to go and a good time.
It is nice that somebody from Los Angeles says there are other nice cities because when I was in Los Angeles in 2016, I thought exactly the same about LA. And just last year, when I was there, I remembered why. It's such a beautiful city. Like a lot of people say it's too large and whatnot, and kind of there's only like they reduce Los Angeles to the Hollywood Boulevard or something. But if you actually go into the mountains in the Hollywood Hills or something, it's such a beautiful city. And there is a also related to Fulbright, a our Fulbright coordinator in LA, which is Ann Kerr. She has a house in the Pacific Palisades, which is part of
Oh, that's
um,
nice. Yeah.
yes, and she bought it, I think, in the 1950s or something. For that was long before the prices went as crazy as they probably are right now in Pacific Palisades, and it is so beautiful. This this kind of metropolitan area that I can. I think that means something about Berlin if somebody from that area of Southern California says that Berlin is nice. So we feel a bit proud about this.
Well, the best I live very close to Los Angeles, and the best part of being here is in January when
Mhm.
you open the newspaper and it says the whole east coast of the U.S. or Europe has a blizzard and terrible weather, and you look outside and it's 20 degrees Celsius and it's sunny.
Right. The sun is just setting above the beach or something. Okay, that is
Yeah.
beautiful. Um, how do you remember your time in Germany and specifically as a Fulbrighter in Berlin? So, how was that Fulbright experience for you?
Oh, I loved it. I loved it. So I first of all, I just loved being in a different country, working with people who had a very different perspective. On the one hand, the perspectives were the same because science is science everywhere, but there were also some differences. One of the people I worked with, she was a student, and her family had come from the former East, Germany, and I just loved hearing the stories that she told me about the former East, her grandmother, for example. And so it gave me a very different perspective about the world. So it was just an opportunity to learn about new things. And of course, Berlin is fabulous. And the Fulbright organization had events that were very special. They had lectures, and I loved going to those lectures. I loved being part of that. So, I mean, all in all, it was just a great experience. And yeah, it was very, very special.
Just to clarify, you were there on a professor scholarship, basically, right? So you were already
That's right.
a professor with UC Irvine, and then you went over, because a lot of people that we speak to have done this as part of their PhD, for example, but you were already a professor, right?
I was already a professor, was 2005, 2006. And
right.
Yeah.
You also serve as a reviewer for the US Fulbright Commission.
Yes.
What does that entail, and what do you look for in an applicant?
Oh, okay. It's a really good question. So, you're given a set of applications to review, and the things that I was looking for were
Applications for what is this mostly? Sorry for
I
clarifying.
mean, what
kind of
kind
of applicants is this? Is this mostly kind of professors? And
professors?
yeah,
Yeah, this
okay.
was for professors. So first of all, you look at the plan. So how clear is the plan of what a person wants to do? What are their goals? You also, and this is very basic, and I know we talked about this for yourself, but you want to make sure that you have a host who's lined up, and that the goals of the host are aligned with the goals of the applicant. That's really important. You also want to look at language ability. So for some countries, it doesn't matter. I mean, in Germany, I don't recall, but I don't think you would need to speak German.
Not
At
in
the
Berlin,
time,
at least.
not in Berlin. It helps, but it's not necessary. I was able to speak German at the time, but it, of course, improved my German to be there for a year. But, in some countries, like, if you were to go to Romania, it's probably important that you have some language ability, or if you're going to some country in Africa, let's say Ghana, right? It's very important that a person have French, be able to speak French. So you look at the language, right? And of course, it depends very much on the country. In England, you don't, English speakers don't have to worry. So I would say those were the main things. Oh, yes. And then, of course, it's not just the fact that a person has a plan and a clear goal, but you want to look at what that plan is. And what is it that they want to accomplish? Is it going to be something significant? And, is it, and is it realistic, right? A person may want to change the world, but it may not be realistic. So, it should be important. It should be something that can make a difference in scholarship in some way. So those are the things that I look for.
I love this notion of making a difference. I think there is no better way of ending such a fantastic episode. Thank you so much, Gloria, for your time and all the interesting insights. I could continue asking you many more questions because your research is so fruitful, and there is so many different aspects that you've done research about. There were so many positions on your CV where I thought, oh wow, I would love to know what she did. Like, nearly 10 years at Microsoft Research and Boeing and EDS, and there are so many different, then all your time in Israel would be very interesting. We don't have that time today, so thank you so much for your time and this glimpse into your work and parts of your life. Thank you so much, and all the best to Irvine.
Oh, thanks, and thanks for having me.